Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever found yourself staring at your phone, waiting for that call or message? The silence at first feels like an empty void. You start wondering, did I do something wrong? Are they too busy? Or worse, have they stopped caring? When someone doesn't call or message for an extended period, it's easy to feel uncertain, even hurt. Questions arise: are they busy, distracted, or uninterested? While the specifics of someone's silence may vary, one truth remains: constant actions reveal priorities. Words are often dressed with politeness or hesitation, but actions, especially consistent ones, hold the truest reflection of someone's intentions and values. Consider how people naturally allocate their time and energy. In a day filled with responsibilities, relationships, and countless distractions, everyone makes conscious and subconscious choices about where to invest their attention. The way a person chooses to spend their time is an unfiltered declaration of what truly matters to them. Even in a fast-paced world, people make room for what feels significant. When communication is absent, it speaks volumes about a person's priorities. Silence isn't always an indicator of malice or neglect, but it often reflects the reality of where someone's focus lies. Think of the moments when you were engrossed in something deeply important to you. Perhaps it was a work project, a personal goal, or simply a time of introspection. In those moments, your attention naturally shifted toward that priority, and less critical matters fell to the wayside. Similarly, when someone chooses not to reach out, it indicates that their thoughts and efforts are elsewhere. However, this is not to say that silence should be immediately interpreted as disregard. Life is complex, and people encounter challenges, emotional struggles, and periods of isolation. Sometimes silence reflects internal battles rather than external disinterest. But even in these cases, the lack of communication serves as a reminder your role in someone's life cannot be more significant than their willingness to include you in it. Actions over time build a pattern, and patterns reveal where someone's heart truly lies. It's important to distinguish between momentary lapses in communication and habitual silence. Everyone gets busy occasionally, but those who value you will make an effort to stay connected despite life's demands. A quick text, a brief call, or even a message saying, "I'm thinking of you," demonstrates that you remain in their thoughts, even during challenging times. The absence of such gestures, especially when it becomes a recurring theme, points to a deeper prioritization issue. Understanding this dynamic can be both liberating and challenging. It liberates you from overanalyzing and chasing after someone's attention, but also challenges you to accept what their actions are revealing. People are free to make choices, and those choices reflect what is important to them. Instead of interpreting silence as a reflection of your worth, see it as a mirror of their focus. When you observe the choices people make about where they invest their time, it becomes clear that everyone's priorities are uniquely aligned with their goals, emotions, and values. It's not about blaming them for their decisions or trying to force yourself into their list of priorities. Rather, it's about recognizing that their actions or lack thereof are providing you with valuable insight into their current mindset and the role you play in their life. Think about relationships that thrive despite the chaos of everyday life. These are the connections where communication flows naturally because both parties prioritize the bond. Whether it's a best friend who always checks in, a colleague who consistently supports you, or a partner who makes time despite a busy schedule, these relationships stand out because they're built on mutual effort. Silence, when prolonged and unexplained, indicates that such mutual effort may not be present. A person's silence also invites you to consider your own energy and time. Are you placing disproportionate weight on their lack of communication? Are you waiting for validation or attention from someone who has chosen not to prioritize you? These questions aren't easy, but they are necessary for understanding the dynamics of relationships and the importance of valuing yourself. When someone chooses not to communicate, it doesn't mean they're inherently bad or malicious. It simply means that their priorities do not align with yours in the way you might have hoped. This realization can be painful, but it also opens the door to clarity and self-awareness. By observing the patterns in someone's actions, you gain the ability to make informed decisions about how much energy and attention you should give in return. Ultimately, communication is a two-way street. It flourishes when both individuals make an effort to stay connected. If one side consistently falls silent, it's an indicator of an imbalance in priorities. Recognizing this imbalance is not about assigning blame, but about understanding the natural ebb and flow of human relationships. People invest in what they care about, and their actions leave a trail of evidence about where their heart truly lies. By shifting your perspective, you can move from a place of confusion and disappointment to one of clarity and empowerment. The absence of communication becomes less about you and more about their priorities. This shift allows you to focus on yourself, your goals, and the connections that reciprocate the energy you give. Silence is one of the most powerful forms of communication, often more telling than the words people choose to speak. When someone doesn't call or message for a prolonged period, it's easy to focus on what's missing: words, updates, affirmations, but what's actually present is a message of its own. Silence holds a truth that words sometimes cannot convey. It's in these quiet gaps that deeper meanings reveal themselves, often saying more about a person's intentions, feelings, and priorities than any carefully crafted sentence ever could. Silence can mean many things depending on the context and the relationship. It may signal a lack of interest, a shift in focus, or even emotional withdrawal. Alternatively, it can stem from hesitation, uncertainty, or internal struggles. Regardless of the reason, silence is rarely neutral. It is active, deliberate, and intentional, whether the individual is fully aware of it or not. What they choose not to say, the effort they do not make, and the time they do not spend communicating are all choices that carry weight. One of the reasons silence is so impactful is because it leaves space for interpretation. Unlike words, which are often limited by their definition, silence invites you to fill in the blanks with your own thoughts, emotions, and assumptions. This is where silence becomes even louder. When someone doesn't call or message, your mind may wander into countless scenarios. Are they busy? Have they lost interest? Are they waiting for you to reach out first? Each possibility feels like a potential answer, yet none offer certainty. In this ambiguity, silence forces you to confront the truth about how you perceive the relationship and how much energy you're willing to invest in someone who isn't communicating. In relationships, whether romantic, platonic, or professional, communication serves as the lifeline that keeps the connection alive. When that lifeline is cut off, even temporarily, it signals a change. It doesn't necessarily mean the connection is severed completely, but it does suggest a shift in dynamics. Silence, when prolonged, has a way of making you reevaluate the balance of effort in the relationship. Who initiates most often? Who follows up? Who is more invested in maintaining the bond? These are questions that silence inevitably brings to the surface. In many cases, the absence of communication is less about the words left unsaid and more about the lack of effort behind them. A person who truly values you will find ways to stay in touch, even in the busiest or most challenging times. They may not have hours to spend on a call or lengthy conversations, but they'll make the effort to send a simple message or acknowledge your presence in some way. Silence, on the other hand, often indicates a lack of prioritization. When someone doesn't reach out, it's not because they've forgotten how to use their phone, it's because they've chosen not to. This isn't to say that silence is always a conscious decision. People experience moments of overwhelm, distraction, or emotional turmoil that may cause them to withdraw. But even in these moments, silence is a choice. It's the choice to retreat rather than engage, to hold back rather than reach out. While understandable, it's important to recognize that silence can still have consequences. Relationships thrive on connection, and when that connection is absent for too long, it begins to weaken. Silence also holds a mirror to your own expectations and boundaries. How do you respond when someone stops communicating? Do you immediately reach out to fill the void, or do you sit with the silence and reflect on what it might mean? Your reaction to silence often says as much about you as it does about the other person. It reveals your level of emotional dependence, your ability to set boundaries, and your willingness to accept what their actions or inactions are telling you. When silence becomes a recurring pattern, it can no longer be dismissed as a momentary lapse. It evolves into a statement about the relationship itself. People communicate in the ways that are most natural to them, and if silence is their default, it may indicate a deeper detachment or a misalignment in priorities. This realization can be painful, especially if you've invested heavily in the relationship, but it's also an opportunity for clarity. The most challenging aspect of silence is its tendency to make you question yourself. It's easy to internalize someone's lack of communication as a reflection of your worth or value. However, silence is rarely about you, it's about them. Their decision not to call or message is rooted in their own priorities, struggles, or distractions. Understanding this can help you detach emotionally from their silence and view it more objectively. Silence doesn't just communicate absence, it creates a space where truth emerges. In that space, you can observe the patterns of the relationship, the balance of effort, and the reality of their priorities. It's a space that invites you to step back, reassess, and decide how much energy you're willing to invest moving forward. When communication fades, it's natural to wonder about the reasons behind it, but one essential truth often gets overlooked. If they cared deeply enough, they would find a way to reach out. This principle applies universally, whether the person in question is a friend, partner, or colleague. People prioritize what matters to them, and in the realm of relationships, that prioritization is most evident through consistent effort. When someone chooses not to communicate for an extended period, it reflects their level of commitment, interest, or engagement in the relationship. People are inherently resourceful when they care about something or someone. Think about the times in your own life when something truly mattered to you, whether it was a goal, a loved one, or even a fleeting opportunity. You likely found ways to make time, even in the busiest of moments, because the importance of that person or situation outweighed any obstacles. Similarly, when someone cares enough, they'll find the time to communicate, no matter how chaotic or demanding their life may seem. This doesn't mean expecting grand gestures or constant attention. Small, meaningful efforts speak volumes. A simple text, a brief call, or a quick message expressing, "I'm thinking about you," demonstrates consideration and care. These small acts of communication show that, despite their schedule, you occupy a significant place in their thoughts. The absence of such efforts, on the other hand, paints a starkly different picture. It's not always about the quantity of communication, but the quality and consistency of it. Effort is a choice, not a matter of convenience. The idea that someone is too busy to communicate is often a facade for deeper truths. Everyone is busy. Life is filled with obligations, responsibilities, and unforeseen challenges. Yet people manage to make time for what they deem important. When someone continually neglects to reach out, it's not their schedule preventing them, it's their prioritization. If you matter to someone, they will carve out moments to connect, even if it's brief or infrequent. Their actions or lack thereof are a reflection of where you stand in their list of priorities. It's crucial to recognize the patterns in someone's behavior rather than focusing on isolated incidents. A single missed message or an unusually long gap in communication could be circumstantial, a result of temporary busyness or a personal struggle. But when this behavior becomes a pattern, it signals something more significant. Patterns don't lie, they reveal the underlying truth about a person's feelings, intentions, and priorities. If someone consistently fails to communicate despite opportunities to do so, it's a clear indication of where their focus lies and where it doesn't. While it's natural to seek explanations for someone's silence, it's equally important to avoid justifying or rationalizing their lack of effort. People often fall into the trap of making excuses for others, attributing their silence to stress, forgetfulness, or other external factors. While these explanations might occasionally hold merit, they should not become a default way of dismissing someone's inaction. Excuses can blind you to the reality of the situation and lead to a one-sided dynamic where you're continually justifying their behavior instead of acknowledging the truth. When someone genuinely cares, their actions align with their words or even speak louder than them. They don't leave room for doubt about their intentions because their efforts make it clear. They don't disappear for long periods without explanation or fail to respond to messages indefinitely. Instead, they make the relationship a priority, even if only through small, consistent gestures. These actions reflect their investment in the bond and their recognition of its value. The absence of effort, on the other hand, speaks just as loudly. When someone doesn't call or message for an extended period, it signals a lack of urgency or importance attached to maintaining the connection. This realization can be painful, especially if you've been deeply invested in the relationship. But it's also a necessary truth to acknowledge, as it allows you to recalibrate your expectations and energy. This understanding doesn't mean you should demand constant communication or immediate responses from those around you. Life is nuanced, And relationships don't thrive on pressure or unrealistic expectations. However, they do require mutual effort and engagement. A lack of communication over time indicates an imbalance in that dynamic, one that often leaves you carrying more of the emotional weight. In relationships that matter, effort flows naturally. People who value you won't leave you wondering where you stand because their actions will consistently reinforce your importance in their lives. They won't use silence as a placeholder or an escape. Instead, they'll find ways to stay connected, even when it's inconvenient. This is the essence of care. It's not about grand gestures or constant attention, but about the willingness to show up time and time again. Understanding this principle can be a turning point. It allows you to shift your focus from chasing after someone's attention to recognizing where it's freely given. It frees you from the mental and emotional toll of overthinking someone's silence and redirects your energy toward relationships that are reciprocal and fulfilling. In relationships, communication isn't just a method of exchanging words, it's a way of reaffirming presence, value, and connection. When someone chooses not to call or message you for a prolonged period, they're not merely silent, they're making a statement, whether intentional or not. This absence of effort often points to a reality that is difficult to accept. They may not value the relationship as much as you do. This realization can feel like a cold splash of water, forcing you to confront the disparity between how you view the connection and how they perceive it. Value in relationships is often demonstrated through action, not words. It's easy for someone to say they care or to make promises in moments of vulnerability or intimacy, but true value is reflected in consistency. It's shown in the way they reach out, stay engaged, and make an effort to maintain the bond. When these actions are absent, it's a glaring sign of misalignment in priorities. People naturally invest time and energy into what they value, and when someone doesn't communicate, they're signaling that the relationship doesn't hold the same significance for them as it does for you. It's important to understand that valuing a relationship doesn't necessarily mean constant communication or grand gestures. Value is shown in small, consistent efforts that demonstrate consideration and care. A brief check-in, a thoughtful message, or even a quick call can mean the world because it says, "You matter to me." When someone repeatedly fails to make these small efforts, it's not because they lack the time or capability, it's because they've chosen not to prioritize you. People will often justify their silence with excuses like being busy or preoccupied, and while those reasons might hold some truth, they rarely tell the full story. Everyone is busy. Everyone faces challenges and distractions. Yet people make time for what matters most to them. A lack of communication isn't about an inability to reach out, it's about a lack of will. If someone truly values you, they won't let days, weeks, or months go by without making an effort to connect. They will find a way, even in the smallest of ways, to show that you're on their mind. When someone doesn't communicate for an extended period, it forces you to reflect on how much you've been investing in the relationship and whether that investment is being reciprocated. Relationships are not meant to be one-sided. They require a balance of effort where both parties contribute to building and maintaining the connection. When the balance tips too far in one direction, when you find yourself constantly initiating, reaching out, and carrying the emotional weight, it's a clear sign that the other person doesn't value the relationship as much as you do. This realization can be painful because it often clashes with the expectations or hopes you've built around the relationship. You might have believed that the bond was stronger, deeper, or more meaningful than it actually is. Coming to terms with the fact that someone you care about doesn't feel the same way can feel like a betrayal, but it's also an opportunity for clarity. It allows you to see the relationship for what it truly is rather than what you've hoped it to be. One of the hardest parts of recognizing a lack of value is resisting the urge to overcompensate. When someone's silence leaves a void, the natural inclination is to fill it, to reach out, to seek answers, to fight for the connection. But this often leads to a cycle of chasing and disappointment where you're continually giving more while receiving less in return. Overcompensating doesn't make someone value you more, it often reinforces the imbalance in the relationship. It sends the message that you're willing to do all the work, even when they're putting in none. Instead of chasing someone who doesn't value you, it's essential to redirect your energy towards self-reflection and self-respect. Another important aspect to consider is that value isn't something that can be forced or negotiated. People value what they choose to value, and no amount of effort on your part can change that. Trying to convince someone of your worth only diminishes your own sense of self. True value is freely given. It doesn't need to be earned or demanded. If someone truly values you, their actions will show it without any prompting or pressure. Silence can feel like rejection, but it's also a form of revelation. It strips away the facade of words and forces you to confront the reality of someone's feelings or lack thereof. It may be tempting to hold on to the hope that their silence is temporary, that they'll eventually realize your worth and come back around. But waiting for someone to value you is a dangerous game because it places your sense of self-worth in their hands. Ultimately, the absence of communication isn't just a lack of words, it's a lack of effort, care, and consideration. It's a sign that the relationship doesn't hold the same weight for them as it does for you. Recognizing this truth can be difficult, but it's also empowering. It frees you from the burden of chasing after someone who doesn't see your value and allows you to focus on relationships where mutual respect and effort are present. When someone doesn't call or message for a long time, it's natural to seek answers, but one of the most critical realizations is that their silence often reveals far more about them than it does about you. Silence has a way of peeling back the layers of pretense, exposing the truth of someone's priorities, emotions, and intentions. It's not always what is said that speaks the loudest, but what is left unsaid. When communication ceases, it's less about your worth or actions and more about their capacity, mindset, and willingness to maintain the connection. People's behaviors are mirrors of their internal world. Silence in particular can signal a range of things from emotional detachment to a deliberate decision to create distance. It can also indicate that they lack the courage or the emotional maturity to address what they're feeling or thinking. Instead of confronting discomfort or conflict, they retreat into silence, leaving you in a state of confusion. This withdrawal often isn't a reflection of your value, but a testament to their inability to navigate the complexities of relationships with honesty and openness. When someone values and respects you, they make an effort to communicate, even during challenging times. Silence, especially prolonged silence, suggests a different narrative. It's easy to assume that their lack of communication is a reflection of something you've done or failed to do, but this assumption often overlooks the fact that their actions or inactions stem from their own choices. Each person is responsible for how they show up in a relationship, and their silence says more about their priorities than it does about your worth. Some people use silence as a tool of avoidance. They avoid expressing their true feelings, whether it's indifference, fear, or even resentment. This avoidance can stem from a fear of confrontation or an unwillingness to engage in the emotional labor required to maintain a relationship. Instead of addressing issues head-on, they opt for silence, creating an emotional gap that speaks louder than words ever could. This behavior reflects their struggle to handle relationships with maturity and grace, not a reflection of your shortcomings. It's also important to understand that silence is often a choice. People who care deeply and value a connection will find ways to communicate, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. The decision to remain silent, especially for a prolonged period, is a conscious one. Whether it's driven by indifference, distraction, or a deliberate desire to distance themselves, their silence is an action or inaction that reflects their current state of mind and emotional priorities. The challenge lies in not internalizing their silence. It's human nature to wonder if you've done something wrong, if you're not enough, or if you could have done more to keep the connection alive. These thoughts can spiral, leading you to doubt yourself and your worth. But it's crucial to remember that their silence is not a verdict on your value. It's a reflection of their choices and their capacity to engage. It's not your responsibility to carry the weight of their decisions or to take on the burden of their lack of communication. Silence can also be a way for some individuals to maintain control in a relationship. By withholding communication, they create uncertainty, keeping you in a state of emotional limbo. This dynamic can be manipulative as it leaves you second-guessing yourself and questioning the relationship's stability. Recognizing this pattern is essential to understanding that their silence is less about you and more about their need for control or their inability to communicate effectively. While silence may feel like rejection, it's often a sign of someone's limitations. Not everyone has the emotional tools or the willingness to engage in a meaningful and reciprocal relationship. Their silence reflects their inability to meet you where you are or to invest the effort needed to sustain the connection. It's a revelation of their priorities and a signal of where they stand in terms of emotional availability. This understanding doesn't necessarily make the experience of silence easier to bear, but it shifts the focus. Instead of internalizing their lack of communication, you begin to see it as a reflection of their own struggles, choices, or disinterest. This perspective allows you to step back and evaluate the relationship with clarity. Are you holding on to something that isn't being reciprocated? Are you investing energy in someone who isn't willing to invest in you? Their silence, while painful, can also be liberating. It offers a chance to see the truth without the noise of excuses, explanations, or false reassurances. It allows you to assess the relationship for what it is, rather than what you hoped it would be. In this sense, their silence becomes a gift, a difficult but necessary revelation that empowers you to make decisions based on reality rather than illusion. By acknowledging that their silence speaks to their limitations, priorities, and emotional availability, you free yourself from the need to overanalyze or fix the situation. You shift the narrative from "what did I do wrong?" to "what does their silence reveal about them?" This shift is transformative, as it places the responsibility for communication and the lack thereof where it belongs. When someone you care about doesn't call or message you for a long time, it's easy to fall into the trap of interpreting their silence as a reflection of your worth. You might find yourself questioning what you did wrong, whether you failed them in some way or if you're simply not good enough to deserve their attention. This internal narrative is not only damaging but also entirely misplaced. Their silence, as much as it stings, is not an indicator of your value. It's a reflection of their choices, priorities, and sometimes their inability to maintain meaningful connections. The human mind has a natural tendency to fill in gaps with stories, especially when faced with silence. When someone stops communicating, the absence of words can feel like a blank canvas, and we often paint it with assumptions that are more about our insecurities than reality. These assumptions can lead to overthinking, anxiety, and a deep sense of inadequacy. But here's the truth: your worth is not tied to someone else's decision to reach out or stay silent. Their actions or lack thereof are a reflection of their inner world, not yours. It's important to remember that everyone's actions are driven by their own experiences, thoughts, and emotions. Just as you can't control how someone perceives you, you can't control their ability or willingness to communicate. When someone chooses silence, it's often more about their limitations than it is about your value as a person. They may be dealing with their own challenges, distractions, or emotional struggles that have nothing to do with you. Understanding this helps to detach your self-worth from their actions. Another critical aspect to consider is that self-worth is intrinsic. It's not something that can be granted or taken away by another person's behavior. Whether someone communicates with you consistently or fades into silence, your value remains constant. It's not dependent on external validation or the approval of others. This is a powerful realization because it shifts the focus from seeking affirmation from others to cultivating a strong sense of self. The danger of tying your worth to someone's attention is that it puts your happiness and sense of self-esteem in their hands. You become vulnerable to their whims, their distractions, and their priorities. This dependency can create a cycle where you constantly seek their approval, only to feel diminished when it's not given. Breaking free from this cycle requires a deep understanding that your value is independent of how others treat you. You are enough, just as you are, regardless of who chooses to call, message, or remain silent. Silence can feel personal, but it's often anything but. People act in ways that serve their own needs, often without considering the impact on others. When someone doesn't reach out, it might be because they're preoccupied, unsure of how to communicate, or simply not prioritizing the relationship. While this can hurt, it doesn't diminish your worth. Their silence is a reflection of their own choices and circumstances, not a measure of your importance or value. It's also worth noting that everyone has their own communication style and emotional capacity. Some people are naturally more communicative, while others struggle to express themselves or maintain consistent contact. Their silence might stem from a lack of emotional intelligence or awareness rather than an intentional disregard for your feelings. Recognizing this can help you separate their actions from your sense of self-worth. It's not your responsibility to fix their shortcomings or to carry the burden of their silence. Building a strong sense of self-worth involves shifting your focus inward. Instead of looking to others to affirm your value, cultivate it from within. This means acknowledging your strengths, embracing your imperfections, and treating yourself with kindness and respect. When you have a solid foundation of self-worth, you're less likely to be shaken by someone else's silence. You understand that your value isn't up for debate. It's an unchangeable truth that exists regardless of external circumstances. Practicing self-compassion is an essential part of this process. It's easy to be hard on yourself when someone pulls away or stops communicating, but this only reinforces feelings of inadequacy. Instead, remind yourself that their silence is not about you. Treat yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer to a close friend. Recognize that you are worthy of love, respect, and connection, even if someone else fails to show it. Lastly, surrounding yourself with people who value and affirm you can reinforce your sense of worth. When you invest in relationships with individuals who consistently show care, respect, and appreciation, it becomes easier to recognize and let go of connections that don't offer the same. These positive relationships serve as a reminder that you are deserving of effort and attention, and they help to counteract the sting of someone else's silence. Your worth is not up for negotiation. It doesn't waver based on who calls, who doesn't, who stays, or who leaves. It's an inherent part of who you are, and it remains constant regardless of how others choose to act. Recognizing this truth allows you to navigate relationships with clarity and self-respect, knowing that your value is not dependent on someone else's validation. When someone doesn't call or message for a long time, it's easy to feel like you're left in a void, wondering what their silence means. In that space of uncertainty, you might begin to question their feelings, intentions, or priorities. But one of the most empowering realizations you can have is that silence can also provide you with a moment of clarity. It gives you the space to reflect not on what they think or feel, but on what you need and deserve in a relationship. Their absence, as painful as it might feel, creates an opportunity for you to reassess your boundaries, your standards, and your priorities. In the hustle of maintaining relationships, it's easy to lose sight of your own needs. You may find yourself caught up in trying to meet someone else's expectations, accommodating their schedule, and prioritizing their happiness. But when silence enters the equation, it interrupts this flow and forces you to stop and evaluate. This is not just about the other person's actions, it's about how those actions or lack thereof align with the life and relationships you envision for yourself. Silence creates a space where you can reflect on what you've been tolerating and what you truly deserve. Have you been settling for inconsistent communication, minimal effort, or a one-sided dynamic? Have you been investing more in the relationship than the other person? These are tough questions, but they are necessary ones. Their silence might hurt, but it's also a chance to look inward and ask yourself if you've been compromising too much. When you examine someone's prolonged silence, it becomes a mirror reflecting the balance or imbalance of the relationship. A healthy connection is built on mutual respect, effort, and consideration. If their silence highlights a lack of these elements, it's a wake-up call. It's a reminder that you deserve relationships where your time, energy, and emotions are valued. This isn't about setting unrealistic expectations. It's about recognizing when someone's actions are consistently falling short of what's reasonable and fair. One of the hardest lessons in relationships is learning to let go of the illusion of potential. It's tempting to hold on to the hope that someone will change, that they'll eventually reach out, or that their silence is just a temporary phase. But this hope can trap you in a cycle of waiting, overanalyzing, and doubting yourself. Reflecting on their silence allows you to confront the reality of the situation rather than clinging to what you wish it could be. Taking time to reflect on their silence is also an opportunity to check in with your boundaries. Boundaries are the invisible lines that protect your emotional well-being, and they dictate what you will and won't accept in a relationship. If someone's prolonged silence violates your sense of respect, consideration, or reciprocity, it's a sign that your boundaries need to be reinforced. It's not about punishing the other person, it's about honoring yourself and ensuring that you're not continuously hurt by patterns that don't serve you. Reflecting on silence isn't just about assessing the other person, it's also about understanding your own patterns. Are you someone who tends to overgive, overexplain, or overextend yourself in relationships? Do you find it hard to step back, even when someone's actions make it clear that they're not prioritizing you? Their silence provides a moment for self-awareness. allowing you to recognize any tendencies you may have to ignore, red flags, or diminish your own needs in the pursuit of connection. When you take the time to reflect, you also create an opportunity for growth. Silence, as uncomfortable as it is, forces you to sit with your thoughts and feelings. It encourages you to process the disappointment, sadness, or frustration that comes with being ignored or overlooked. Through this process, you gain clarity about what you want, what you need, and what you're no longer willing to tolerate. This clarity empowers you to move forward with intention, whether that means addressing the issue with the other person or choosing to distance yourself from the relationship altogether. This silence also invites you to think about the bigger picture. Are you focusing too much energy on someone who isn't reciprocating? Are you placing too much importance on a single relationship at the expense of others or at the expense of your own self-care? Reflecting on these questions allows you to recalibrate, ensuring that your energy is directed toward relationships and activities that bring you joy, fulfillment, and a sense of connection. This period of reflection can feel lonely, but it's also a form of self-care. It's a chance to pause and realign with your values and goals. You can use this time to invest in yourself, whether that means pursuing your passions, strengthening your relationships with supportive people, or simply taking a moment to rest and recharge. Silence, while it may feel like a void, is actually a canvas for self-discovery and growth. It's a chance to reconnect with yourself and to recognize that your worth is not determined by anyone else's actions or inactions. The clarity that comes from reflection doesn't always lead to easy answers, but it does lead to truth. It helps you see the situation for what it is rather than what you wish it could be. It strengthens your resolve to prioritize yourself and to seek relationships that uplift and fulfill you. Silence in this way is not just a moment of absence, it's a powerful teacher, offering lessons about boundaries, self-worth, and the kind of love and connection you truly deserve. When someone doesn't call or message you for a long time, it's easy to feel as though you're waiting in limbo, uncertain of what to think or how to move forward. Their silence might seem like a signal to hold back, to pause your own life while you wait for them to reach out. However, the most liberating realization you can have is that you are not obligated to put your life on hold for anyone. Their inaction should not dictate your actions, your mood, or your progress. Instead, this silence can be a powerful catalyst for you to reclaim control of your time, energy, and focus. Waiting for someone to act can feel like a natural response when you're emotionally invested in them. You may feel that by refusing to wait for someone to call or message, you're also making a statement about your own priorities. You're saying that your time, energy, and emotions are too valuable to be spent in limbo. This doesn't mean you're being harsh or dismissive. It means you're being intentional about how you live your life. You're choosing to invest in the things and people that bring you joy, growth, and connection, rather than allowing someone's silence to hold you back. This approach requires courage, especially if you care deeply about the person who's silent. It's not always easy to take a step back and focus on yourself when your heart wants to wait for their return. But choosing to prioritize yourself isn't about giving up on them. It's about ensuring that you're not giving up on yourself. It's about recognizing that your life is worth living fully, regardless of who is or isn't showing up for you at any given moment. Taking control of your life in the face of someone's silence isn't just a reaction to their behavior. It's a proactive choice to honor your own needs, dreams, and potential. It's a way of affirming that your happiness and fulfillment are not contingent on someone else's actions. By refusing to wait, you're embracing the freedom to grow, to thrive, and to live on your terms. In doing so, you not only reclaim your time and energy, but also create a life that reflects your true worth and values that embrace this silence not as a loss, but as a gift. Because in it, you find clarity, strength, and the courage to choose yourself first. And when you choose yourself, you attract those who are ready to do the same. Thank you.